One day in January 1965, my 7-year-old life changed forever. One of our grown-up half-brothers had collected me from school instead of our mum in her red Mini Super. You remember the things that were different. The curtains were half closed. Our father had died. The following day, Mum asked me if I wanted to go to school. I said no, and was astonished when she said that was okay. Every morning you sort of forget and have to relive the realization that my beloved dad had indeed gone forever. 2 years later, I found myself in a boarding school for girls 100 miles away. Mum had asked if I wanted to go, and I said I did, but in reality, I had no idea what that meant. It was the Royal Masonic School. It had been founded by Freemasons about 200 years before for the daughters of Freemasons who had come on hard times. I qualified in the same way as most others did. Apart from more attention to my education, a great benefit was to discover that I was not alone in having lost a parent. Some had lost more, and some had their home life in turmoil. I was fortunate that our mum talked with us about our father, mostly the funny and lovely things. She kept his memory alive for us and encouraged us to talk and think about him. At the time, I had not realized how many people didn't have this. Still now, death is a subject to be avoided and skirted around with euphemisms. Recently widowed, I find that many friends are wonderful, but some just don't know what to do or say, so they avoid you. Best thing to do is just carry on and be there. When the bereaved is ready, plan and then do some nice things. Maybe just a walk in the countryside. Anything, but just be there. Life goes on for those left behind. Time passed, and I moved up to senior school in a different county. It was enormous and was opened in 1789, but built at its current location in the early 30s. You may have seen it, since the interior school shots from the Indiana Jones movies were filmed there over a decade later after this happened. As with the junior school, visiting family was limited to 3 times a term. Half-term brought great excitement. There were 2 other days marked as exeats, where you were allowed to go out for the day, strictly back by 8 p.m, even if you were 18. The school was very disciplined. It also provided everything, including all uniform right down to the PJs and underwear. Everything had been thought of, and it blurred the lines between the haves and have-nots. We were a mixture of girls not chosen for our academic ability, which is unusual for an independent school. We had lots of advantages, which I, like many, didn't realize was unusual. Included was private music lessons, sports, swimming, etc., like the uniform at no extra cost. The fees were means tested, so some paid and some didn't. There were girls who had virtually nothing, and some who had everything, so school was a level playing field, so to speak. Shortly after moving up to senior school, 4 of us decided to have a go at a Ouija board game. We were giggly girls aged 10, 11, and 2 were 12, so we're talking 1968. Mary was almost 11 and in my year. We had in common that our fathers had died when we were 7. The elder 2 were Yvonne, who had been a little older and was more worldly wise than us, and Lucy was a tall girl, good at swimming, and whose parents were teachers. She had been brought up in Singapore. We were good friends who got on well with each other. We were creative kids and tore up pieces of paper from a rough book and spread them out in a circle, marked in biro with the alphabet in order. Yes and no were placed in the middle, leaving room for the orange plastic toothbrush mug to be used as our planchette. We were sat cross-legged, squidged in a bathroom, on the lino floor, in a circle, and giggling happily. We were all sat in the one lockable room available, apart from the actual toilets. We started with the statutory declarations of "Get thee behind me, Satan," that the older, and in our eyes wiser two girls said that we must protect ourselves from unknown malevolence. We continued to giggle as we moved on to the second item on the agenda that the older two girls had said must happen. Each of us was to ask a question. It should test that this was real. My memory is really mostly about my own experience. I have no idea what prompted my question and the flowery way I asked it. I said, "How many children have been conceived between my mother and my father?" Mary, being a friend in the know, would have answered 2, because my older half-brothers only shared a father with me and my brother, as I would have said. The older girls may have answered 4, just knowing that I had 3 brothers. The plastic mug carefully spelt out THREE, clearly not right. We were all still giggling as each other asked our questions in turn, knowing that one or several of us were pushing the plastic mug. It was a good game. However, somehow we still remember promising not to do this again, and then the plastic mug started moving around the yes, and now, along with the outer alphabet paper circle, it got faster and faster and faster. No one could have been pushing it. It moved faster than we could follow it with our outstretched fingers, so fast that we couldn't even keep hold of it. Then, the pieces of paper flew outwards in all directions to the corners of the room. We were no longer giggling, but very frightened and silent. Afterwards, we were hushed into a stunned silence and didn't discuss the terrifying event until years later, when we met up at a school reunion in 2000, as we had agreed to do in the dormitory one night, talking in hushed tones illegally after lights out. Being children, you move on. At the time, we didn't dwell on it. The much looked forward to Christmas holidays arrived, and it was home time at last. During that Christmas holiday, when I was 11 years old, my mother, kind of unprompted, told me that I would not have been named with the name they gave me. She explained that my father's mother had died when he was a month old. He had resolved to have a daughter to name after her. The Scottish grandma I knew was in fact his stepmother. He had had 3 sons, my 2 half-brothers and full brother, before he got the longed-for daughter, me. This part I had known. The next part was new to me. I remember my mother's opening line. There is no way that you would have of knowing this. She went on to explain that during the 5.5 years between my brother's birth and mine, sadly, they had miscarried, far along enough to know it was a girl. It was later, on my own in my bedroom, my thoughts went back to the experience that I and my 3 friends had had at school a couple of months or so before. I suddenly realized the significance this had on the accuracy of the answer I got from the Ouija board. There had been a 3rd child conceived between my mother and my father. I had the proof from my mother, which I had never known. No one had spoken about it ever, but for some reason, something prompted her to tell me right then. At age 11, I had thought it to be my father talking to me. Yvonne had gone on to become a published psychologist and teacher, and was interested to hear my memory of that day, as both of us were well aware that recollections can vary. She doubted that we had had such a dramatic experience as she remembered. I told her what I remembered, and she was stunned and said, "Yes, so it did happen." We all remembered it very, very similarly. Yvonne's memory was of her being told to stop messing with boys, pull her socks up, and concentrate more on her education. This she did. Like me, she had thought that it was a direct message from her father. While at school, we never mentioned it, although we remained friends. I had concluded that something good was looking after us that day, because not one of us had ever touched anything like this since, and never will. This happened just over 24 hours ago. Me and two similarly aged girls decided to have a Ouija board session in the middle of the night, since we didn't have anything better to do. We went out at around 2 a.m. to a nearby forest. We live in the capital of Norway, so there is civilization everywhere, but there are also a lot of small pockets of nature and forest. For some context, the girls had done a two-person session at the same location before, a couple of weeks ago, where they had a connection with something that presented itself as Caleb. They were asking a couple of milder questions, which were answered seemingly truthfully and normally. The planchette was moving calmly and slowly at a controlled pace. At a certain point, the girls told me they felt a change in the atmosphere, which they could not pinpoint. Either that was their bodies being colder, or the air thickening. They couldn't point out what it was, but something was off. The planchette began doing sudden and more rigid movements that was in contrast to the slow and controlled previous ones, and at a high intense pace, moved towards the letters R, U, N. My friend quickly ended the session with a goodbye and two quick circles drawn with a planchette, and sprinted the entire way to their apartment, 300 meters uphill. Whether Caleb was warning them of an upcoming danger or threatening them himself is unknown, and probably never will be known. This was a couple of weeks ago. Now, fast forward to 2 a.m. last night, when we went to revisit the same location, this time with me. I have personally never believed in anything occult related, and this was my first time ever participating in anything of the sort, aside from a cleansing ritual. But I'm questioning my belief in religion after this occurrence. We started and instantly felt a connection. We asked if there was someone with us, and the planchette moved to yes, with a rigid, aggressive and energetic movement. I was at this point asked if I was moving it, because this type of movement is completely unusual for the girls. The planchette was moving this type of way. Keep in mind, they are frequent occult-indulged people, and are doing Ouija board sessions often, yet this is a one-of-a-kind experience. We asked what the name was, and the planchette responded with a combination of letters D, J, S, W. I'm not entirely sure this is 100% correct, but I recall these were the letters. We asked if DJSW was its name, and it responded with M, X, V. The next question is, how old are you? And the answer we got was 6. We asked a couple other questions, which I don't remember, and the answer being gibberish, notably gibberish, consisting only of Roman numeral letters. But to 2 other ones, I mentally noted down as being 6 as well, forming 3 answers, where what was communicated to us was a 6. My friend seemingly did not pick up on this. At this point, we felt a shift in energy, which the girls described as identical to the one a couple of weeks ago. One of my friends turned completely dead in the eyes, cold to the touch, as if she was entering a panic state, and started whispering something to the other one. and as I leaned in to listen what was being whispered, she said, "Behind you." My other friend did not turn around, but looked her straight in the eyes and got chills all over her body. I instantly turned to see behind my friend and behind myself, but saw nothing. Regardless of not saying anything, the way my friends reacted, I could tell they were being genuine and not fooling around. To say we were all scared now is an understatement. I kept checking behind us every couple of seconds. We had to continue with our Ouija connection, as we had not said goodbye yet. We asked it to repeat its name and when it was born to get a better response. It stated A-K-A-H to name, and 125 to when it was born, which was followed up with year 125 before or after Christ, which we quickly realized we could formulate better, so we repeated, "Were you born in 125 before Christ?" The response was yes. While we were discussing, still in fear, the planchette started moving again, this time spelling out K-A-H. We asked if this was the surname, and the answer was yes. We continued discussing, and this time it started moving again towards A, and in the process of moving to K, I took control of the situation, and I don't remember what I said, but we ended up forcing it to stand still. I told my friends that we should not repeat what it's spelling out, not even read it aloud in our minds more than necessary, in case it was along the lines of a "say my name 3 times and I will possess you" type thing. We continued asking questions, asking if we could leave, and got no. Asking if it wanted to hurt us, and it said no. We also asked if the entity knew our names and who we were, and we went in clockwise motion, asking the entity to spell out our names, and it did so flawlessly for each of us. I noticed my friend turn pale and having a dead look in her eyes again, while she told us, "We must get out of here now." The planchette was beginning to accelerate and draw a figure of 8 on the board, completing one loop before my friends realized what it was doing and forced it to goodbye and said our goodbyes, taking the board and sprinting away as fast as possible. The first girl, who was the one who said "behind you," later explained that she had seen a tall shadow, a perfectly black outline of a thing with long fingers or claws, standing right up close to the other girl. Keep in mind this was 2 AM and it was pitch black in the forest, except you could only see what was around us in about a 3-meter range from all of us due to a flashlight we brought with us. It was then explained that it moving in a figure of 8 is the eternity attempting to break into our world. Apparently, Googling the name had given one of the girls the results that Akka was an alias of the demon of something, supposedly a very powerful one, named A something something us, which was first written about in the year 122 to 121 before Christ. None of us knew this, so we're pretty sure the ideomotor effect does not apply here, as neither of our subconscious minds would be capable of faking this and provide us with the information we didn't even have. Along with this, for the past 3 sessions the girls have been doing, they have reported that they both, immediately after the session, lose all energy and fall asleep, or act weird and out of place. They also report levers being flicked, both for small and large lights, and passing out. When I was 11 or 12, my 2 friends and I had the great idea of playing with a Ouija board. The rest of the night was a mess. Before I explain what happened, here's a little backstory on the board we used. The board belonged to the sister of one of the friends involved in this story, Dee. While she and a friend were using it, the board was put away without saying goodbye first. Whatever was talking to them that day freaked Dee's friend out enough to pretty much throw the board back into the box and close it up. I did some reading, and apparently ending a Ouija session without saying goodbye can result in something either latching onto you or the board itself. We were stupid enough to use the same board. My friend, Eri, was invited to spend the night at my house. Being the little badasses that we thought we were, we decided we'd play with the Ouija board. Our friend Ryan lived across the street from me, so we called him to join us. We started playing and asking if there was anyone with us, if they wanted to tell us their name. The planchette spelled out A-N-D-R-E-E. Okay, cool. My middle name. At this point, I was sure that Eri was messing with me. Y-O-U-M-U-S-T-R-U-N. Just remembering and writing that gave me chills. So obviously, we were pretty much done with talking to spirits and say goodbye. We noped the hell out, decided we'd go across the street back to Ryan's. At the time, the property behind his house was vacant, and a small chain link fence was the only thing keeping us from exploring. So we did. Eri has always had great intuition, and when she says we need to go, it's time to go. She started to feel uneasy being in the vacant backyard and returned to the other side of the fence. I followed. There was a growing tension in that yard. Suddenly, we both get a feeling that something bad is going to happen. We start yelling for Ryan to come back over, but he thought we were freaking out over nothing. We finally convinced him to come back and started helping him over the fence to speed things up. We were chunky kids. Eri and I each had a grip on either of his arms when we suddenly felt a lot of resistance. Ryan's hood was being pulled back by something unseen, and he was audibly gasping for air. I don't know if one of us reached to grab his hood while the other pulled him over, but we managed to get him back onto his property, and he could finally breathe. He was disturbed and just wanted to go back to his house for the night. Eri and I parted ways with him and went back to my house for our sleepover. We talked about what had happened, but since we were kids, the situation was now funny and cool. It wasn't. Due to my past issues with sharing a bed with someone, I slept on the floor and gave her my bed. When I woke up in the morning, I had 3 long scratches on both sides of my pelvis and waist. I had slept alone. Eri couldn't have done it. It looked like deep cat scratches, but my cat was declawed, not my choice, and I never scratch myself like that. It never happened again, but it's something I still think about to this day. Almost 5 years ago, when I was 16, I played with a Ouija board, and it went horribly wrong. The game itself was fine, and seemingly everything went as normal as expected, until later that night, at around 3 or 4 a.m, when bad things happened to me. I don't want to drag this out in detail, but as I was on my phone at 3 a.m, my closet door, where I kept the board hidden from my parents, slowly opened on its own. This closet door, by the way, is extremely difficult to open, and yet that night it did so smoothly, without any sound. What would happen next was me in a state of shock and fear, and after failing to yell for help, I was so terrified my screams came out no louder than whispers. Eventually, I have to stress eventually, because I could barely get the courage to get up. I eventually ran to my bedroom's bathroom to message for help, which I only got a few texts in before my phone started to glitch. That in itself, I can imagine, isn't as terrifying as it seems, but after that day, I would come to experience daily sleep paralysis. It fizzled out slowly after a few months, and it was the first time in my life I ever had sleep paralysis, but I was aware of things people had told me about it. It's why every single time it happened, I closed my eyes and waited for it to pass over. I had heard your mind plays tricks on you and can cause you to hallucinate things, and I just didn't want to take that risk. Some sleep paralysis moments were out of the ordinary and God, so terrifying, and at one point I felt something worse had happened in between. All this activity happened in my bedroom, mostly when I was playing the game. Things would fall off counters. I would always hear knocks in sets of two. 2 times it spoke my name, in separate occasions, but always in the morning. There were rare moments my dog would stay outside my bedroom and bark at my door, refusing to enter my room. To this day, my family, who have all come to know of what happened, despite me keeping it a secret for a while, they hear constant footsteps in my room when no one is there. The footsteps is all that happens now. The majority of the activity stopped after exactly a year, to the day I played the game. I hesitate in telling this story because I don't want to contribute to the Ouija board stigma. It is in fact a board with letters painted, stamped or stenciled on it, or the way Hasbro makes them, a sticker on plasterboard. It is not a portal or a gateway, and nothing lives inside them. It would be rather tight. Energy feeds off energy, and the board, being an inanimate object, can't emit its own energy. That comes from those who use the board. I was given my first Ouija board by my grandmother, I think for my 14th birthday. She liked to give odd things for birthdays for some reason. A group of neighborhood kids were bored and hanging out in my room. We didn't know what we wanted to do, so just hung out, chatting about whatever kids chat about. There was one girl being snoopy, and she looked in my closet and spotted the board. She came out all excited and asked if we could try it, and I said yeah, whatever. So 2 of them sat facing each other with their fingers on the planchette and started asking questions. Silly questions like, does so-and-so like me? Or does he have a girlfriend? Well, that didn't end well, when the thing pointed to no, backed up a bit, and pointed to no a second time. She got upset and decided she didn't want to play anymore. Then it was my turn with someone else. I forgot what she asked, but the planchette didn't move, and she became frustrated, so she got up and someone else sat down. This is where things became weird. She asked if she could speak to her grandmother, who had recently passed because she missed her, and it pointed to yes. So the thing starts doing a figure of 8, slow at first, then gaining momentum, then it stopped. This girl started to ask if her grandmother was present. It said no, and she just had to ask who we were talking to. Well, that did it. It spelled out devil. A rocking chair across the room started rocking all by itself, real fast. There were screams and a stampede out of my room and out of the house. Luckily, no parents were home at the time. They didn't tell their parents right away, but later that night, they all had nightmares and they had to tell their parents. Their mothers called my mother up all upset. Apparently the fathers thought it was funny, but the mothers didn't, and I got in trouble, even though I wasn't the one who pulled the board out of the closet and said so, but that didn't matter. Grounded. The nightmares weren't all they suffered. Of course, looking back, I think that group exaggerated a wee bit. They heard things and felt things that scared them so much, they slept in their parents' room at night for a week. I think that pissed their mothers off more than what happened. They were told to stay away from me. Thinking back, we kids were taken advantage of by a prankster spirit who knew exactly what to say to scare kids, and it worked. Other than being grounded and my rocking chair rocking by itself, nothing happened to me at that particular time. I didn't have any nightmares. The only nightmare was my mother. After that, a couple of things happened that scared the hell out of me, and I don't scare easily. There was a thing in the corner where I woke up to my normal docile cat snarling, growling and hissing at the corner of the room at something only she could see. I was 16 at the time, and the most recent Shadow Man appearance this past August. Those two incidences were the most frightening. Some believe the ideomotor effect is what causes the planchette to move. I think we were being hormonal teens at the time and worked a psychic connection or linked together, causing the chair to rock. Or it really was a trickster. I'll never forget this as long as I live. I also didn't believe in anything paranormal or outside the realm of science until this happened. I still don't know what to make of it, to be honest, and I would love to hear what people think might have been going on. So my freshman year of college, I moved into a dorm in a very old historic building in Florida. It was 2020, and COVID was still really bad, so each student had their own room. I quickly made friends with a girl who lived directly next door, Grace, and a girl on the third floor, Bailey. Only on the first or second night, we got to talking about ghosts and spiritual stuff, as we realized we were very into the occult and whatnot. The third floor girl, Bailey, suggested that we make and play with a Ouija board. I had tried one before at sleepovers, and it had never worked. But I was interested, and it was a super old building that was supposedly haunted, so we gave it a shot. We made the board out of cardboard, and that was the first of many nights of us using this thing. It worked every single time without fail, no matter what combination of people had their hands on the planchette. We eventually got a store-bought board. No change occurred. We used this board probably every day. It became like an obsession. It's all we would talk about. I'm still not sure if it was because the thought of speaking to someone otherworldly was exciting, or if something else was going on. I could tell so many little stories, but I'll try to sum up the important stuff. We knew it was legit the first night we played. We were quickly introduced to the entity on the other side. It went by Shove most of the time, but occasionally by Solo or S.O. I don't think we spoke to anyone but them the entire time. We tested it by asking the name of another friend we had recently made stepmom. It guessed correctly immediately, without her having her hands on the board. We had just met her. There is no way we could have known this. On the second night, we asked Shove to give us a sign that they were really there. We heard a noise at the closed door to my room and looked over to see a shadow outside of it, as if someone was standing right outside the door. We opened it, and of course, no one was there. We closed it, and the shadow was gone. Little things happened over the course of the semester. Things would be moved that I couldn't explain. The sink in the bathroom down the hall would turn off and on by itself when nobody was around. Stuff like that. After a few weeks of this, things really started to get weird. One night, I was playing the board with Bailey's boyfriend and Grace. Bailey was laying with her head on her boyfriend's lap, not touching the board. Suddenly, she started panicking and hyperventilating. We thought she must be having a random panic attack or something, but she claimed she was unable to control where her eyes were looking. We went to take her out of the building because she was so freaked out, and in the lobby, she swore she saw someone out of the corner of her eye, saw that no one was actually there, and bolted out of the front doors, terrified. Shove really seemed to turn on Bailey for whatever reason. On another night, not long after that one, the three of us original girls were playing the board, and Bailey told us her back was really hurting. She asked us to look and see if she had really bad sunburn on her lower back. Strange, but that's what she said it felt like. There was a ton of fresh scratches on her lower back when we looked. This was scary because she was not leaning on anything and had both hands on the board. Around the time of these events, Bailey started to act really strange. For the first months I knew her, she was always very calm and down to earth, but she began acting extremely short-tempered and possessive and jealous. Now, this is where I'm not sure what to think. Was it a mental health crisis, or were our nightly activities causing side effects? I'm not sure I'll ever know, but I remember Bailey screaming at me and stomping up the stairs to her room and being so shocked it was so out of character. During a fight with her boyfriend, she ripped her hair out and slammed her head on the floor, and then, after a week or so, she was involuntarily institutionalized after telling her therapist that she was going to take her life. This was obviously very upsetting for Grace and me. And then Grace had begun having suicidal thoughts. I'm not sure if this started before or after Bailey left. And then one morning, I woke up and checked my phone, and Grace had gone to hospital earlier that morning because she woke up and couldn't breathe. It ended up being some tonsil issue, I believe, but the timing was weird. Both Grace and Bailey ended up dropping out of college for mental health reasons. I spent the rest of the semester and the one after in that room and never had any serious issues. I had a roommate the second semester of that year, and she didn't have any issues either. I played the board every once in a while to show curious friends the ghosts that lived in my room. Shove was always there, but did nothing more than respond on the board. I'm still very much in touch with Grace and Bailey. Bailey completely returned to her old self not long after dropping out. Whether this was due to the removal of stressful college work or being away from that building for good. Was she possessed? Who was Shove? Was Shove even real? Or did we just make him up because we desperately wanted to believe something else was out there? I'll probably never get any answers, but I guess at least I have a good story to tell at parties. When I was about a year into high school or so, around 1997, I was playing with my friend's Ouija board at her house. We were in her room, and just two kids essentially playing around with her board. I was pretty open-minded about it, and if anything, not necessarily a believer or disbeliever. This was for the simple fact that I had nothing to go on, with no experiences or anything to push me to either conclusion. Since one cannot prove a negative, the only real negatives against the paranormal was evidence of things against the paranormal. These were those events which could be explained as something else. When we were in her room, we got the box out and immediately went to town, chanting like idiots, and doing all kinds of movie stuff to get spirits to communicate with us. I always thought that there may be some secret instructions in the box, telling the owner to burn the instructions after reading the line, telling them to be the ones moving the planchette when friends came over. Without taunting, we got a lot of seemingly benign contacts that I didn't really believe at the time, until one of them proved themselves. We asked it to give us a sign, like they do in the movies, and not a split second later, her hamster slams into the inside of its cage and seemed startled as it recovered and was running around its cage and under the shavings and popping back up. This was all happening like it was in danger, as if a hawk was flying above. I figured it was just a coincidence, and we went outside after a little while. We opened the board again, and this time we had a pencil and paper. After many questions, I needed more proof, so I told the spirit to write its name, with my hand holding the pencil. I closed my eyes and turned my head up. To my great surprise and shock, the word Zozo was written on the paper. The weird thing about this is that I had never heard the name before in my life, nor had I really known what was going on. I also just thought it could be simply some kind of subconscious thing going on. Let me tell you, when my arm was moving, I did not feel like someone was grabbing it. It felt like the muscles required to move the pencils were tingling or somehow light or numb. I assumed maybe that ghosts just communicate through noisy channels, or maybe it was a misspelling or something lost in translation. Years later, about 2 years ago, I had talked to my longtime friend about this experience, and we reminisced about it. I decided to Google Ouija Zozo, and of course, the correct spelling came up, which was the first result, so I clicked on it. I have to admit that as a grown man, I do not get scared easily, but seeing the sheer amount of people who experience contact with this entity sent the most dense goosebumps throughout my skin, and more than I thought possible. This series of very uncoordinated, temporally spaced out, and geographically separated events is just way too precise to be coincidence, or some kind of mass hallucination. It was also very unlikely that this was subconscious muscle twitching as stated before, since it was experienced by people hundreds of miles away from one another. Had I heard about this before the event, I could understand that it could be my mind playing tricks on me through the power of suggestion. As a side note, for all the people I tell my story to who never believe me, I couldn't convince myself it happened, but it did. I draw no conclusions as to what happened. I'm clueless, but open-minded. I was 5. My brothers were 14 and 18 when this happened in 1970. My then 18-year-old brother was interested in the occult and searching for more meaning in his life. They each received a Ouija board by Milton Bradley for Christmas that year. They busted that thing out and went to town. Even at 5, I thought this was a no-brainer. Later on, I was able to see the damage they cause. After the first few times they used it, we pretty immediately saw entities flitting back and forth and all around the house. I saw one in the shape of an adolescent boy running up and down our staircase, doors slamming all times of day and night. I'd be sitting and watching Looney Tunes, and an invisible hand would wrap around my upper arm, and I'd feel it squeeze its fingers into my flesh quite hard. I went into the kitchen where my mother was making dinner. I told her about it. She checked my arm and noticed that whatever that was left red finger marks. Not in the direction of my own hand, to be sure, as I didn't do it myself. She looked a bit alarmed. The following day, there were bruises. My mother checked. She didn't like what she saw. Then, I heard footsteps on the wooden floor at night, walking towards me. If I was asleep, I was awakened by a very raspy voice in my ear. I could feel hot breath on my ear. No one physically was there. I had horrible nightmares. My brothers also had similar experiences. That thing was just a beast, an angry beast. It took a couple of years for us to rid the house of that angry thing. My good friend wanted to experiment with the Ouija board. I gave her one of the Ouija boards, having dismissed the issues we'd had before. My friend had an entity that hadn't had a physical life since the medieval times. Long story short, she had an issue after she'd lit a candle to talk to this disembodied soul. Her blouse caught fire and burned her breast. She didn't tell her mother about it, as her mother was a very strict Catholic from Spain. She'd have beaten her with the hard side of a hairbrush had she found out. She covered her burn in vitamin E and gauze and hoped for the best. That was the last of it. I was 12. I never touched another Ouija board again, nor did I ever let my daughters bring one into the house. This is my telling of the worst few months of my life, ending with the most terrifying experience I have ever witnessed. It was my 8th grade year. I was a very shy girl, but I had a little circle of friends. We would all take turns hosting sleepovers, and most of them got boring, so we would come up with various activities to do for the night. Sometimes we would rent horror movies, or explore the woods, try to sneak a little brandy from the cabinet, etc. On this particular weekend, it was my friend's turn to host. We'll call her Kat. Kat was my best friend at the time, and she had a big house with a finished basement. Everyone liked it when she hosted, because we were away from the prying eyes of parents, being as loud as we wanted, and generally left to our own devices. So, it was that Friday during lunch hour. Kat tells the group she bought a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board from Kmart the night before. I was thinking, finally, someone is offering something that sounds interesting. The supernatural has always been an interest of mine, and I have had experiences previous to playing the Ouija board. Although all other experiences I've had throughout my lifetime pale in comparison to the one I'm discussing, they have still very much defined my openness to the idea of the spiritual realm from a young age. But a glow-in-the-dark Kmart Ouija board? That's a kid's game, a harmless joke. So, let's play. It's the end of the school day. I walk with Kat to her house, and we get everything ready for the sleepover in the basement. Her dad made us snack trays, 6 cases of soda, pixie sticks. We have everything. We were just waiting for all the other girls to show up. As the girls started to arrive, my anticipation for this Ouija board was building up. I started to fidget, and then one of the girls said, "Get the board, I want to see it." I'm like, "Yes, thank you," because I wasn't going to be the one to suggest it. Kat pulls the game out from the next room, and when the girls and I see it, we laugh. It is completely marketed for children, and we can't keep a straight face while reading the instructions. Nevertheless, we set the ambience, turning off every light but a corner lamp, and 4 girls sitting cross-legged around this harmless, glowing board. At first, we were all being silly, asking random questions and getting responses we knew were coming from one of our own. I grew a little tired of the banter and decided to set a more serious tone, telling my friends to stop moving the planchette. It took a few moments, but we gathered all the maturity we could muster at that age and started to ask purposeful questions. "Is there someone that wants to communicate with us?" one of the girls asked. The planchette moved to yes. "What is your name?" I asked. The planchette moved and spelled B-O-B. One of my friends had enough at this point and wanted the board put away. We glided the planchette over to goodbye and put it away, ending my first experience with the board. We all went about our usual business. Nothing strange or extraordinary happened to any of us, but I did feel drawn to this board and wanted to play again. A week later, I would get my chance. Kat invited me over to hang out in her basement, watch movies, and possibly play with the board. We walked to her house, grabbed some snacks, and went downstairs. It wasn't long before she brought out the Kmart board, and we set up to play. I happened to be waiting for my boyfriend to call her house so he and I could talk. Now, this was in the 90s. Not unusual for that to happen, considering no one had a cell phone. We asked light questions, trying to keep it a little playful. I asked, "When is my boyfriend going to call?" The response, 7:MINUTES. We both looked at the digital clock in the corner of the room, noticed the time, and waited the 7 long minutes. The phone rings, 7 minutes on the dot later. Kat and I started to freak out, standing up and screaming at each other. It was a full-on manic episode. We answered the phone after a few rings, and who was on the line? My boyfriend. I couldn't have a conversation with him at that point. I was on level 10, and I told him I would call him back when I got home that night. That was the last time I touched that board, but not the last of my troubles. Part 2. I lived in a 2-story house at the time, and had the entire upstairs to myself. That may seem like an enjoyable idea, having an entire upstairs to yourself. Not when you're me. I'd been hearing what sounded like footsteps coming up my stairs on numerous occasions before experiencing this board. But all those experiences meant nothing compared to the crap that hit the fan a few nights after last messing with that spirit board. The first night, after the 7 minutes experience, I couldn't ignore my feeling of dread as I brushed my teeth and climbed the stairs to go to my bed. By myself, alone. Crap. It took me a while, and as I waited to let myself slowly slip into sleep, I looked around my room. My breath started to quicken and get heavier. My body started to sweat and shake. My pulse was rising fast. It was my body responding to something I couldn't see. I was having a panic attack, but nothing was there. I felt the darkness in my room creep over me like a blanket. This darkness looked as if it was coming from the corner of my room and merging to form a mass on top of me. Are my eyes playing tricks? Is this how one experiences a panic attack in the dark? I start to calm myself down. I deliberately breathe in and out very slowly, and my heart rate goes down and I stop sweating. I never close my eyes. I have to see what's coming, no matter how terrifying. This mass has wrapped around my vision. It took all the light out of my room and enveloped me in the darkest of darkness. I laid there, knowing I wasn't sleeping, blinking my eyes over and over again, hoping it's just a trick of the eye. I waited there for what felt like an hour, staring into darkness until I fell asleep. Night after night for weeks this went on. Sometimes I would wake up because there were whispered conversations above my head. I would turn to look towards the hallway, and there was always a shadow that seemed to be posted up by my bedroom light switch. I knew the first time I saw this shadow, it was Bob. Now, old Bob must have known me pretty well. He had me trapped. He was in the middle of me and my exit. There was no way in hell I was getting up to turn my light on, let alone run past this thing to get to safety. That thing picked the perfect spot. So what did I do? I stared at him until I fell asleep. One night, I mentally could not handle going through this crap, so I slept on the living room couch. I'd had enough and let Bob chase me out of my room. I fell asleep rather quickly, thinking I had somehow outsmarted the fella by being downstairs because I didn't feel or see anything. I woke up in the early hours of the morning, choking. I'm coughing and choking and trying to catch my breath. I'm still half asleep when I see the light turn on in the kitchen. To paint the picture, I'm sleeping on the couch in the living room. I can see into the kitchen and dining room from where I lay my head. So the lights turn on, and thinking it's my mum, I call out to her. I get no response. I call out to her again, and that's when I notice a shadow rising from the floor in the kitchen. I stare, unmoving, unblinking, not able to make a sound. A shadow person, that thick mass of darkness I had seen in my room for weeks, had a form. It seemed to have a head, shoulders, arms and legs, but only the silhouette. A person wearing a long black robe with a hood, no semblance of face, just empty darkness in its place. I felt nauseated as it glided across the kitchen floor, heading towards me very slowly and maniacally. Unable to look away, I watched as this mass of darkness descended upon me. As it got close to the foot of the couch, I thought it was going to snatch me up and drag me to hell. All I could do was wait for the inevitable and stare at this creature gracefully making its way over to take my soul. And just before he made it to my feet, that thing dipped into the floor and disappeared. I was still not able to scream for a few seconds after that. When I attempted, it came out in whimpers. When I regained my ability to use my vocal cords, I screamed for my mother. She came out of her bedroom, seeing me crying and freaking out. She asked what was wrong. I told her the story, and she responded the way all parents do, telling me it was a dream. I would have believed her, but the kitchen light was still on. To this day, I have experiences and have come to accept it. I have learned that you should not use the Ouija board if you know nothing about it. It can be a tool if used the right way, but I will never use one again.